The call that shouldn't exist. Rain hit the city like it was angry at the ground. It didn't wash the streets clean. It pushed old dirt into new corners, made every neon sign bleed color into puddles, made every shadow look like it had teeth. Nura Hale kept her head down as she hurried past the bakery dumpster with her coat pulled tight, one hand pressed over the small tear in her sleeve. She'd stitched it twice already, but cheap thread and a hard life didn't hold together for long. She was 22, but exhaustion made her feel older. The kind of older that didn't come from birthdays. It came from bills, from hunger, from the way strangers looked right through her like she was glass that wasn't worth wiping clean. Nura had just finished another late shift at the Riverside Diner. Another because her life was made of another. Another rude customer, another manager's insult, another paycheck that barely reached her fingers before it vanished again. Tonight, the manager, Mrs. Byrne, had snatched the tip jar off the counter and shaken it like a toy. "You don't get to keep charity," she'd said loud enough for the customers to laugh. "You should be grateful you're even here." Grateful. Nura had nodded the way poor people learn to nod, not because they agree but because arguing costs more than it pays. She'd cleaned the last table, wiped the last smear of ketchup, and left the diner with a single paper bag of leftover rolls a cook had quietly slipped her when the manager wasn't looking. Now she walked fast, boots splashing, breath fogging, trying to beat the rain to her tiny apartment above a closed barber shop. Her phone was old and cracked and always on low power. She checked it anyway because she always checked it. Habit. Worry. Hope that someone, somewhere, needed her for something that mattered. That was when she saw him. At first, she thought it was a bundle of clothes. Dark fabric collapsed near the payphone at the corner of 9th and Morrow. The phone hadn't worked in years, but the metal box still stood like a relic in a world that had moved on. Something about the bundle looked wrong. Too deliberate. Too neat. Then the bundle moved. A small sound escaped, not loud, not dramatic. Just a fragile breath that didn't belong in the cold rain. Nura stopped. The city had taught her rules. Don't get involved, don't look too long, don't ask questions you can't afford to answer. But her feet disobeyed her fear. She crossed the sidewalk, stepped into the shallow alley beside the payphone and crouched. A boy lay on the wet concrete, curled like he was trying to disappear into himself. He looked 7 or 8, small and too pale, with dark curls plastered to his forehead. His clothes weren't what any child in this neighborhood wore. They were elegant. A dark velvet coat with embroidered cuffs, boots that had once been polished, a white shirt with tiny silver buttons. He didn't look like he belonged to the city at all. His eyes fluttered open as she leaned closer. They were too dark. Not brown. Not black. Something deeper like midnight water. And there was fear in them, not the loud, childish kind. The controlled kind. The kind a person learns when they've seen danger before. "Hey," Nura whispered. Her voice came out soft, careful. "Are you hurt?" The boy tried to push himself upright. His knees trembled. His arms shook. For one breath, he almost managed it, and then his body folded, dropping back to the ground like the strength had been stolen out of his bones. Nura's heart squeezed. Okay, don't do that." She shrugged off her coat and draped it over him even though it meant she'd be soaked. "You're freezing." He made a faint sound, half protest, half relief. Nura reached for his wrist to check if he was bleeding, and the boy jerked his arm up, urgent. He pulled his sleeve back with clumsy fingers. There, on the inside of his forearm, a number was written in elegant black ink. 10 digits. No name. No note. Just the number, perfect as if it had been printed. Nura stared at it and something cold slid down her spine. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't random. This was a last resort. The boy's lips moved. He didn't speak loud enough to hear, but she saw the shape of the words. Kale. Nura swallowed. "Is this your parent?" The boy's lashes fluttered. His gaze fixed on her like he was trying to hold on by looking at her. Nura pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered. Every sensible thought screamed at her to stop. But then the boy's body shivered again, violent and helpless, and Nura's sense of sensible broke under the weight of her own kindness. She dialed. The line rang once. Twice. Then a voice answered, low, calm, and so cold it made the rain feel warm. "Speak." No greeting. No, hello. Just a command. Nura's throat tightened. I found a boy. He's on the street near 9th and Morrow. He can't get up. He's freezing." Silence. Not dead silence. Not the absence of sound. The kind of silence that feels like someone standing too close behind you. Then the voice returned, quiet and sharp. "Describe him." Dark curls, too pale, velvet coat, silver buttons, she said it all quickly, afraid to pause. Another silence. And then, softer, like the voice had turned toward something precious. Silas. The name didn't feel like it belonged to a normal family. Nura pressed the phone closer. Is he your son? The pause was long enough that her stomach turned. Then one word, yes. Something in that single syllable carried weight. Not just fatherhood. Ownership. Power. Fear. The boy, Silas, made a small sound at the name like it anchored him. His fingers caught the edge of Nura's sleeve, weak but desperate. Nura's voice shook. Please, he needs help. I can call an ambulance. No, the word cut through her like a blade. Do not involve humans. Nura blinked hard, rain in her eyes. What? Stay where you are. The voice lowered and suddenly it wasn't just cold, it was dangerous. Do not move him. If he is not there when I arrive. The pause that followed was worse than the threat itself. Then you will wish the rain had drowned you. Nura's breath caught. This was wrong. This was insane. And yet, as fear clawed at her, something else rose, anger. All her life, people had spoken to her like she was disposable. Like her existence was a favor they were forced to tolerate. Now, even a stranger on the phone thought he could threaten her the same way. Nura tightened her jaw. Listen, I don't know who you think you are, but he's a child. I'm helping him. If you want him alive, you better get here fast. Silence. Then, faintly, like a breath that wasn't surprise but interest. You have courage, the voice said almost to himself. Nura's heart pounded. I have nothing else. The line stayed open. Minutes passed. The rain thickened. Nura shifted, trying to shield Silas with her body. His skin was cold in a way that didn't match the weather, like the cold came from inside him, not outside. His breathing was uneven. He'd inhale, hold too long, then gasp like his lungs forgot what to do. Nura tucked the bag of rolls under her arm and pressed her hand lightly to his chest through the velvet coat, feeling for a heartbeat. Was there. But slow. Heavy. Wrong for a child. Nura swallowed hard. Silas, stay with me, okay? Tell me your name again. His eyes fluttered. Silas, he whispered, barely audible. Then he added, voice thin, don't let them. Don't let who? His fingers tightened on her sleeve. His gaze flicked toward the mouth of the alley. They follow. Nura's stomach dropped. She looked up. Across the street, under the broken awning of a closed furniture store, the rain didn't fall right. There was a small patch where droplets seemed to bend around something. As if the air was occupied. Nura's pulse spiked. Someone's there. On the phone, the voice sharpened instantly. Describe. I can't see them clearly. But the rain, it's wrong. Like something is blocking it. A low sound came through the line. Not a word. A controlled inhale. Then a name spoken with quiet fury. Night hunters. Silas shuddered like the word itself hurt. Nura pressed the phone to her ear. What do I do? The voice turned gentle in a way that didn't feel kind. It felt precise. Put your palm against his sternum. Center of his chest. Apply steady pressure. Nura's hand trembled. Is he dying? He is slipping, the voice said. He has poison in him. He cannot fight it alone. Nura put her palm to Silas's chest. Under the velvet, his heartbeat felt like a distant drum. She pressed gently, steady like the voice said. Silas, look at me. Breathe. His eyelids fluttered. His lips turned faintly blue. Nura's throat tightened with panic. He's not breathing right. Pressure, the voice commanded. Call him. Nura leaned close. Silas, stay with me. I'm right here. You're not alone. For a moment nothing happened. Then warmth sparked under her palm. Not normal warmth. It spread like a pulse, a strange heat that climbed up her arm, and with it came a sensation, a shadow of something ancient, hunger, fear, and stubborn will. Silas gasped suddenly, sucking in air like he'd been underwater. His eyes snapped open. For a heartbeat, just one, his irises glowed a faint red. Nura froze. Silas stared at her like he recognized her in a way he shouldn't. You feel like, he whispered, then coughed weakly. Like what? Nura asked, voice shaking. Silas's eyes slid again to the street. Closer. And then the world changed. A black vehicle rolled into view like it owned the road. Then another. Then another. No sirens. No drama. Just the quiet, controlled arrival of something powerful. They stopped in perfect formation, sealing off the alley mouth. Men stepped out, tall, still, dressed in dark suits that looked too expensive for this neighborhood. Their movements were smooth, disciplined. Not normal. One of them glanced toward Nura and Silas, and for a split second, his eyes reflected the street light like an animal's. Nura's blood went cold. Then the rear door of the center car opened. A man stepped out. He didn't hold an umbrella, but the rain seemed to hesitate before touching him, as if nature itself considered whether it was allowed. He was tall, taller than any man Nura had ever been close to, and he moved with a calm that felt like danger. His hair was dark, pulled back. His face was sharp and beautiful in a way that didn't belong to humans. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that didn't smile. His eyes were the color of deep wine and storm clouds. They locked on Silas. And something raw and terrifying, flickered across his face. Fear. Not for himself. For the boy. He crossed the alley with silent steps and dropped to his knees in the puddles, ruining a suit that probably cost more than Nura's entire life. His hands hovered over Silas like he was afraid to touch him too hard. Silas, he said softly. Silas's fingers lifted weakly, reaching. Father, Silas whispered. The man exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a century. He scooped Silas into his arms with impossible gentleness. Then his gaze lifted to Nura. Up close, those eyes didn't just look at her, they read her. The hunger in her empty fridge. The fear in her chest. The bruises on her spirit. The way she'd survived by becoming invisible. His voice was quiet. You called. Nura forced herself to breathe. He collapsed. I didn't know what else to do. The man studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke and the alley seemed to hold its breath. You kept him alive, he said. Nura swallowed. I just did what anyone should do. No, he replied, and the word felt like truth with teeth. Not anyone. Behind him, one of the suited men leaned close and murmured, My lord, the scent, they're near. My lord. Nura's stomach dropped. The man's eyes darkened. Of course they are. He turned slightly, angling Silas's face toward his chest protectively. Then he looked back at Nura and his tone shifted, less like a threat, more like a verdict. You're coming with us. Nura's heart slammed. What? Oh. I have to go home. The man's gaze held her like a chain. You have seen my son. You have heard my voice. You have touched a bond you don't understand. Nura's anger flared again. I didn't ask for any of this. For 1 second the man's expression changed, not softer exactly but aware. As if he respected the fact that she dared to stand up to him. Then he said, Neither did you ask to be poor. Yet here you are. Life does not ask permission. Nura hated that he was right. A shadow moved at the edge of the street. The rain bent strangely again. The suited men shifted, forming a wall between Nura and the alley mouth. The man, the vampire king, because Nura's mind finally accepted what her instincts already knew, spoke a single name, cold as iron. Kale Draven. Like he was reminding the world who he was. Then he looked at Nura and added, quieter, more personal, and if you leave now, they will follow your scent instead. Nura's mouth went dry. My scent. Kale's eyes flicked to her wrist, where Silas's fingers had clutched her. You are marked. Nura stared down. She saw nothing, no wound, no ink. But she felt it. A faint warmth pulsing under her skin like an invisible thread. Silas stirred in Kale's arms and whispered, Nura? Kale's head snapped down. You know her name? Silas's eyes fluttered open just enough to meet his father's gaze. She feels safe. The alley went quiet. Kale Draven looked back at Nura as if seeing her for the first time, not as a problem, not as a witness, but as something the world had placed in his path with purpose. Then, as if deciding something dangerous, he said, Get in the car. Now. Nura's knees felt weak. She didn't want to obey anyone. But she also didn't want to die alone in the rain because she tried to prove a point. So she stood, soaked and shaking, and walked toward the black vehicle, with the vampire king watching her like she mattered far more than she ever had to anyone else. And as she stepped into the warm darkness of the car, she realized the most terrifying part. Silas had called her name like he'd known it forever. And Kale Draven's eyes, ancient and hungry and guarded, looked like they'd just found something they didn't want to let go of. The night court and the girl who wouldn't bow. Nura expected a mansion. She didn't expect a fortress. Kale's estate wasn't on any map she'd ever seen. The car drove beyond the city's bright districts into an older part of the world. A hidden place where stone gates rose out of mist and iron lamps burned with flame that wasn't quite fire. Guards stood at attention, but they weren't human guards. Their stillness was too perfect, their eyes too sharp, their movements too quiet. Nura stepped out and felt the air change. It smelled like rain and roses and something darker underneath, Old bloodlines, ancient power. Inside, the halls were cathedral high, lined with portraits of pale men and women with red eyes and cold smiles. Nura tried not to stare. She tried to remember she was a girl who waited tables. She tried not to shake. A healer met them, a woman with silver hair and gentle hands who touched Silas's forehead and frowned. Poisoned, she said. Not mortal poison. Court poison. Kale's jaw tightened. Who? Someone who had access, the healer answered carefully. Someone close. The words landed like a crack in stone. Nura watched Kale's expression turn into something frighteningly calm. Silas was taken away into a bright room filled with candles and strange herbs. Kale stood outside, fists clenched, and for a moment he looked less like a king and more like a father who didn't know how to save his child. Then a vampire noble arrived, tall, dressed in deep crimson, eyes glittering with curiosity and disdain. A human? The noble said, looking Nura up and down like she was dirt on his shoe. You brought a human into the night court? Nura's cheeks burned. It felt too familiar, rich people judging her clothes, her hair, her posture. Even here, she was the lesser. Kale's voice cut like ice. She saved my son. The noble smiled without warmth. Or she poisoned him. The accusation hit Nura like a slap. I didn't, she said, voice shaking but clear. I found him dying. The noble stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Humans lie when they're afraid. Nura lifted her chin. And vampires lie when they think they're untouchable. A hush fell. Kale's gaze snapped to her. Not angry, impressed. The noble's smile thinned. Careful, girl. Kale moved between them so fast Nura barely saw it. His presence filled the space like a storm. You will not threaten her in my house. The noble's eyes flashed. You protect her already? Kale's jaw flexed. I protect what is under my roof. Nura should have been grateful. Instead she felt insulted. What is under your roof? She repeated quietly. Like I'm a chair. A thing. Kale turned to her, eyes narrowing slightly. Nura forced herself to speak, because she'd spent her whole life swallowing words until they poisoned her from the inside. I didn't come here to be owned. I came because you said I'd die if I didn't. Kale stared at her for a long moment. Then he said softer, you are not owned. Then why can't I leave? Because they will hunt you, Kale answered. And because my son, his voice tightened. My son called your name when he should not even know it. That night, Nura was placed in a guest room bigger than her apartment. She didn't sleep. She listened to the strange quiet of the night court and wondered what she'd stepped into. And then in the early hours, a servant entered with fresh clothes, and a sneer. Put these on, the servant said. Try not to stain them with human sweat. Nura's fingers curled. She could feel the old shame trying to rise. But she remembered Silas's small hand on her sleeve. She remembered the warmth under her palm. So she smiled, sweet and sharp. I'll try, she said. And you try not to stain your soul with cruelty. The servant flinched like Nura had struck her. Nura realized then, the night court was full of monsters. But not all of them had fangs. The secret in her blood and the plot in his court. Silas survived the night, barely. The healer told Kale the poison was designed to weaken a vampire child's bond to life, to make his body forget how to breathe and beat. It was a slow death. A cruel one. And the antidote required something rare, a stabilizing warmth strong enough to pull him back when he slipped. Nura heard this while standing in the hallway, holding a tray of water she'd insisted on carrying herself. The healer looked at her with wonder. When you touched him, he responded. Kale's eyes narrowed. Explain. The healer hesitated, then said, there are old legends. Human bloodlines that carry sunlight memory. Not sunlight itself, but the echo of it. A warmth that can anchor a vampire's life force. Nura's stomach twisted. You're saying it's me? Kale's gaze sharpened. Who are you, Nura Hale? Nura's voice turned small. Nobody. But the healer shook her head. Nobody doesn't do what you did. That day, nobles gathered in the grand hall, the night court's leaders, and they stared at Nura like she was a puzzle. Some with curiosity. Some with hatred. Some with hunger. A council member spoke, voice smooth. If her presence stabilizes the air, then she must remain. Another hissed, she's a human. A liability. A third smiled. Or an opportunity. Nura stood in the center of the room in borrowed clothes, hands clenched, heart pounding. Kale sat on the throne, obsidian and silver, and when he spoke, the room froze. She stays, he said. One noble leaned forward. Because you desire her? A ripple of amusement moved through the room, sharp and cruel. Nura's cheeks heated. She wanted to disappear. Kale's eyes flashed. Because she is under my protection. A different noble, a woman with jeweled fingers, said softly, then mark her properly, my king. So all courts know she belongs. Nura's voice cut in, shaking but fierce. I don't belong to anyone. Silence. The vampire woman's smile turned cold. Human girls should learn humility. Nura swallowed her fear. Humility isn't letting people step on you. Humility is knowing your worth without cruelty. Kale's gaze locked on her. Something in his expression shifted, like her words reached a locked door inside him. That night, Nura found Silas awake, pale but breathing evenly. He smiled faintly when he saw her. You came back, he whispered. Of course, Nura said, sitting beside him. Silas touched her hand. Warmth pulsed again, faint, familiar. You feel like home. Nura's throat tightened. I don't have a home. Silas's eyes softened. Then you can borrow ours. Outside the door, Kale listened. He didn't step in. But he stood there longer than any king should. And when he finally walked away, his face looked like a man fighting a war inside his own chest. Because the closer Nura got to Silas, the more she became a target. And somewhere in the night court, the one who poisoned the air was watching, waiting, and smiling. The betrayal, the hunt, and the king who finally broke. The attack happened on a night that looked calm. A banquet filled the hall with music and crystal light. Nobles laughed. Servants moved like shadows. Nura wore a simple dress, not because she wanted to, but because the court insisted she look acceptable. A nobleman approached her with a glass of red liquid. A toast, he said pleasantly. To the human who thinks she's brave. Nura didn't drink. She didn't trust smiles in a place built on secrets. He leaned close. You don't belong here. Nura met his eyes. Neither does cruelty, but I see plenty of it. His smile faded. Careful. She walked away. Minutes later, Silas collapsed again. Panic exploded through the palace. The healer shouted orders. Kale appeared like lightning, lifting his son with shaking hands. Nura ran to them, heart hammering. What happened? The healer's face went white. A second dose. Stronger. Kale's eyes burned as he scanned the room. And then he saw the red stain on a nobleman's cuff, a powder, almost invisible. The nobleman backed up, smiling. It wasn't me, my king. You can't prove. Kale moved. Not like a man. Like a monster. He didn't harm anyone in a graphic way, but the room felt the promise of violence in the air, the terrifying pressure of a predator pushed too far. Guards seized the nobleman. Kale's voice shook with controlled rage. You poisoned my son. In my hall. The nobleman laughed nervously. He is weak. A human girl is stabilizing him. How pathetic. Nura stepped forward, hands trembling. Stop. Everyone stared. Nura looked at Kale. Your son needs you focused. Not furious. Kale's eyes snapped to her. His chest rose and felt like he was struggling to breathe. Nura swallowed. Let me help him. Kale hesitated, and that hesitation revealed everything. He trusted her. More than he trusted his own court. Nura placed her palm on Silas's chest again. The warmth rose stronger this time, almost painful. Her vision blurred. For a moment she saw flashes, not her memories but someone else's. A woman singing in a language Nura didn't know, sunlight on stone, a child's laughter, and a symbol carved into a ring. Nura gasped. Kale's voice was tight. What did you see? I don't know. Nura pressed harder, steady. Silas. Breathe. Come back. Silas's body jerked, then settled. His lips regained color. The healer exhaled in relief. She anchored him again. But the court didn't look relieved. They looked afraid. Because now it was clear. Nura wasn't just a random human. She was the difference between the heir living and dying. And that made her the most valuable hostage in the vampire world. That same night, someone tried to take her. A servant led her down a hallway, saying Kale requested her presence. Nura followed, until the corridor grew too quiet. Then hands grabbed her from the shadows. A cloth pressed to her mouth. Nura fought, not with perfect strength but with desperate will. She kicked, clawed, bit. She tore free just long enough to scream. And Kale arrived. He didn't roar. He didn't shout. He simply appeared, eyes burning red, presence crushing. The attackers froze. Kale's voice was low and lethal. Touch her again. The attackers fled. Kale grabbed Nura's shoulders, checking her like she was fragile glass. Are you hurt? Nura's breath shook. I'm fine. Kale's jaw clenched. You are not fine. You were alone. Nura's eyes stung with tears she refused to spill. This is what my life has always been. Alone. Unprotected. People thinking they can take from me. Kale stared at her like her words wounded him. Then, in a movement that surprised them both, he pulled her into his chest. Not a romantic, perfect embrace. A real one. The kind that says, I failed to keep you safe. His voice broke, barely audible. Not anymore. Nura froze. Slowly she felt the truth of it. The vampire king, feared by all, was holding her like she mattered. And the night court, watching from the shadows, understood something dangerous. Kale Draven had crossed the line from protector to something deeper. And kings who love, become vulnerable. The truth of the heir, the rise of the human girl and the queen's choice. The next morning Kale summoned the full court. Nura stood beside him, not behind him. It was a small difference. But the room noticed. Kale's voice rang through the hall. The traitor among us has tried to kill my son twice. Murmurs rose. Kale lifted a hand. Silence. A guard dragged in the nobleman from the banquet. He was pale now, his confidence shaken. Kale's eyes burned. Who funded you? The nobleman spat. You think I acted alone? Half this court hates the idea of an heir who needs a human to live. Nura's stomach twisted. Kale's jaw tightened. Then they will learn what happens when they mistake kindness for weakness. The healer stepped forward. My king, there is something else. All eyes turned. The healer looked at Nura. The warmth she carries, it isn't random. It is ancient blood. The last of the Dawn line. A ripple of shock passed through the court. Someone whispered, a myth. The healer shook her head. Not a myth. The Dawn line were humans blessed by old magic, able to stabilize vampire life force. They were hunted to extinction. Nura's throat tightened. I don't understand. I'm just... Kale's voice softened. You are not just anything. A councilwoman sneered. So she's valuable. That doesn't make her worthy. Nura's anger rose. Worthy of what? Respect? Safety? Being treated like a person? The councilwoman smiled cruelly. You want the court's respect? Earn it. Nura took a slow breath. Then she did something no one expected. She bowed. Not in submission. In humility. In control. I don't want your throne, Nura said clearly. I don't want your jewels. I don't want to be worshipped. I only want this. Stop judging people by what they are. Judge them by what they do. The room went quiet. Nura lifted her head. Silas was dying. I helped him. Not because he was a prince, because he was a child. Silas, standing weakly beside the healer now, looked at Nura with shining eyes. Kale's gaze locked on her and something in him softened, not into weakness but into devotion. The nobleman laughed bitterly. Pretty words. But this court runs on power. Nura looked at him. Then maybe it's time it learned something else. Kale stepped forward, voice like thunder. The traitor will be exiled from all vampire territories. His supporters will be stripped of rank. The court tensed. Kale raised a hand again. And the girl, Nura Hale, will remain under royal protection. A noble hissed, You're making her untouchable. Kale's eyes flashed. Yes. Nura turned to him, heart pounding. Kale? He looked at her, and for the first time his voice held something honest. You brought my son back when I could not. You walked into darkness and refused to be prey. You spoke truth to monsters. He took a step closer, careful, like he was giving her room to refuse. If you want to leave, he said quietly, I will let you. I will hide you where no court can find you. Nura's throat tightened. Freedom. The thing she'd prayed for her whole life. But then she looked at Silas, alive, breathing, watching her like she was the best thing the night had ever seen. And she looked at Kale, a king who had been cold and feared, now standing in front of her like a man learning how to be human again. Nura whispered, If I leave, they'll keep trying. They'll come again. Kale's jaw clenched. Then I will burn the world to keep you safe. Nura stepped closer and placed her hand over his heart. It beat. Strong. Steady. Human in that moment. Don't burn the world, she said. Change it. Kale's eyes widened slightly. Nura took a breath. I'll stay. Not as your prisoner. Not as your property. I'll stay because Silas needs me, and because you need someone to remind you that power without compassion is just another kind of cruelty. The hall held its breath. Kale lowered his head, the smallest bow from a king to a girl who had once cleaned tables for coins. Then stay, he said. Not as mine, but as my equal. Silas smiled, tears in his eyes. And in that moment, the night court understood the true twist of the story. The poor girl didn't just save the vampire king's son. She saved the vampire king. Because she taught him the one thing immortals forget. Respect is not given to power. It is earned through kindness.